Hello and welcome to Mental Awakening, the podcast that explores all topics related to trauma recovery, mental health, chronic pain, and healing. I'm your host, Sarah DeKeely, psychotherapist and mental health social worker, and in this episode, I will speak about intimacy with self as gateway to healing. What does this entail? How can we implement it? And what is it that makes us avoid a deeper connection with ourselves? Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of this podcast with me. Today I want to talk about ways to create a deeper connection with yourself and why that's important and what it is that makes us, avoid it. Because there is this human tendency to avoid emotional intimacy with ourselves as well as with other people. But your relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship that you have, including the relationship that you have with life itself. And I have come to realize in my own journey with life that when we make time to connect with ourselves, it usually leads to more meaningful connections with other people. When we actually make time every day to check in with ourselves, we can build more fulfilling lives for ourselves, and we're not constantly striving for external satisfaction. And having a healthy relationship with ourselves also is something that prevents us from being unnecessarily self-critical and judgmental and harsh with ourselves and going through life disconnected, not really quite knowing who you are, but rather operating from that conditioning that most of us were, raised in, and I guess the cultural conditioning, the environmental conditioning, and simply recognizing that there is a generational pattern of emotional expression and suppression, right? So every adult was once a child raised by the previous generation of adults who were raised by the generation before. So emotional patterns get passed down through the generations for better or for worse. For me, growing up, I had a mom who was a warrior. She would constantly tell me, don't do this, don't do that, be careful, watch out for this. And so her constant sense of worry for me made me and turned me into an anxious warrior too. And of course, she had a lot to worry about. I mean, I've spoken about my own journey, my own upbringing, and the things that happened to my family and so on. And these are, if you look back at the previous generation, there was a lot that they had to deal with. There literally was constant survival issues at stake. But these things nevertheless have an impact. Some families show a lot of anger, which in my father's case was that way. He would always show a lot of anger. Some families always hide their anger. This is something that we end up taking on, and that's my point, that when children spend a lot of time in survival mode, whether it's emotional survival or physical survival, they can grow up and pass down patterns of fear and anxiety to the next generation and the generation after. And that's why, I have often felt like I had to do everything really quickly and there's not enough time. And, I have actually worked a lot on this in myself, where I'm a lot more present to myself and to life. And it's an ongoing practice, but it's, patterns that become incredibly deeply ingrained within us. And for some families, the traumas of the older generation are actually unspoken. They don't even talk about it. And there's almost like a lack of awareness about it. I hear this frequently where people tell me, my childhood was great. My childhood was wonderful. My parents were amazing. But then once we actually dive deeper and look at their current conditioning, they start to see that, no, there was a lot that was actually, that wasn't that great and that felt very unsafe, and that I had to suppress in order to feel like I was part of that community, part of that group, and that I wasn't going to get rejected, or that I could keep myself emotionally safe. Our nervous system is also biologically wired to our caretakers, especially when we're little. So we will do everything we can to ensure their well-being, especially when our own emotional needs haven't been met. And so we do that by being a good boy or being a good girl and making sure that we meet the expectations of the caretakers. And all of that obviously contributes to shaping our conditioning. There are many reasons why people find it challenging to have meaningful relationships. Conditioning is one of them, absolutely. But also, we can make emotions binary. We can kind of go, this emotion is good, that emotion is bad. And the truth is that emotions are not good or bad. They're simply data. They're giving us signs and clues into ourselves. And we haven't really been taught how to be with our emotions, how to embrace all of our emotions. So we tend to judge things. We tend to suppress things. And we don't get taught this stuff at school. We don't get taught this stuff by our parents. So we're comfortable around someone who's happy, but we feel really uncomfortable if someone is sad. And this is something that, my profession as well as my own growth journey has really taught me, that the more intimate I become with myself and all of my parts, including my sadness, including my imperfections, the more space I have for other people's, parts. And I've found that to be incredibly beautiful. There's this richness about being able to really embrace everything that you are, as opposed to this traditional, philosophy or psychology where we're always looking to improve ourselves and get rid of certain parts of ourselves. And I just don't believe in that anymore. I think self-improvement and growth is wonderful when you actually embrace everything that you are and you become a space holder for everything that you are. And this is where vulnerability comes in. Another reason to why we have an aversion to a deeper connection with ourselves is that we hide our vulnerabilities. When we experience uncomfortable emotions like shame, shame is a very powerful one, like guilt or fear, or sadness, it can be scary and vulnerable to share these things with somebody else. And it can be incredibly scary to also be with it ourselves. So we tend to avoid it. We tend to distract ourselves from that. And yet, being with these parts of ourselves, as well as sharing that with other people and people that we can trust, can provide us with a deep sense of connection, a sense of acceptance, a sense of belonging. Not to mention some really good brain chemicals, feel-good brain chemicals that start to take place from within. Another reason is that we don't want to risk being exposed, or we don't want to be excluded, especially when it comes to the groups that we belong to. One of the things I've noticed living in Australia for as many years as I have is that in this culture, for example, and I'm sure in many others, but I can only speak of the ones that I've been exposed to, there is this tendency to be sarcastic about everything. Even when something is serious or when something is emotional, people tend to use sarcasm and just lighten it up almost. There's this real discomfort with authenticity and truth. Everything has to be turned into light humor. And it's something that I think most of us have experienced both within group settings, whether it's, social group settings or at work, where we're just wanting to belong. So we tend to just edit ourselves as a way to belong. And of course, there's a time and place for everything. I'm not saying that you need to just, expose everything that you are in any given moment to just anyone. Not at all. But it's important to have an awareness of what is it that I am agreeing to? What is it that I'm doing as a way to mask something? And that awareness, even if you continue to do it, it's okay. But having that awareness is actually how you can, connect more deeply with yourself, as well as what I've always talked about as being authentic power. Another reason to why we tend to avoid connecting more deeply with ourselves as well as other people is that we get triggered. Conversations that go below the depths of surface level chit chat tend to run the risk of triggering people. There's more heightened emotions, and it can be distressing, it can be uncomfortable. And so we don't always want to go there, which is understandable, absolutely. We also hold ourselves back because our emotions were met poorly as children. So when we were growing up, if any of our strong emotions like fear, sadness, anger, were met with negative consequences, we have learned to shut that off, shut that part of ourselves off. I mean, it's like I remember always being told as a child, be quiet, don't be angry, don't cry. So I learned that it's not safe to show how I really feel. No one actually sat with me and said, yeah, it's normal. When you don't get what you want, you get angry. And I'm just going to sit with you until the anger passes, and then we're going to go and do something fun together. And so I never learned that being angry or being sad or, feeling sense of shame, all of these things are actually incredibly human and normal. In fact, I was shamed for having those feelings. So that can make it very difficult for us to connect more deeply with ourselves, and again, as well as other people. So we understand that it's completely normal, based on all the things that I've just mentioned, that we would want to avoid it, that we wouldn't want to, have a deeper connection with ourselves, that we wouldn't want to spend that intimate time with ourselves as well as with other people. One of the most loving thing that we can do sometimes is to just let somebody have a rant, let them speak up and speak their truth, and just hold space for them without judgment and without internalizing it and making it personal and thinking that it's all about you, because nothing ever is. Everything is a projection. Nothing is ever personal. It's always a projection. And no, I'm not suggesting that you just stand there and you take abuse or accept any kind of abusive behavior and you just put up with things that are toxic. Not at all. I'm talking about just sometimes being able to just hold space for someone who is perhaps upset or dysregulated, and making sure that you actually have capacity to do that. But our capacity to do that minimizes when we're not doing that for ourselves. And this is why it's important to, build a more intimate relationship with ourselves, because that way your capacity for stress, your capacity for other people's stuff increases, and your capacity for yourself increases, your own stresses, your own emotions, and so on. So when we learn to forge a relationship with ourselves, we're more attuned to how we feel and what's going on in our body, in our mind. We feel more supported, we feel more at peace. And we also start to recognize our emotions, our thoughts, our sensations, our feelings. And initially when we do that, that can feel really overwhelming and scary. But that's because your brain is learning to calibrate. It's learning to actually interpret these things as safe. And that's why you have to maintain a consistent practice around this. And this is what helps us respond to our needs more effectively. When we have a deeper connection with ourselves, we actually understand more about what we need and what we desire. We're more aware of, what sets us apart from other people and what it is that we need to work on. We're just a lot more tuned in. So the other day, I had this incredible exhaustion and fatigue, a wave of tiredness that washed over me, and I just crashed on the floor for a few minutes, really digesting and processing and sensing how my body was in relationship to that day. And there was this moment of anxiety, almost like panic, that I could have dismissed, but I was very mindful and aware of it thanks to this practice. This moment of fighting fatigue as though being tired is a sin and I cannot surrender to it, under any circumstance. And I had this internal fight response, as if I had to battle with this feeling of tiredness to get rid of it, as if it's something that, is a threat and has to be destroyed somehow. And this is what conditioning does. It's something that is very task-orientated, action-orientated. If you look at the world, if you look at, your history, if you look at the environment you grew up in. So we constantly focus on external sources of achievement and accomplishment, and that's how we feel good when we get things done. We don't take into consideration the incredible power of energy and life force. And so when you surrender, when you take moments of rest, when you fully give in to that rest without judgment, and you embrace what we call this concept of total pleasure and surrender to the present moment, then you actually recharge. You recharge and you're better able to make things happen or get things done, because you also work with the powers and the forces, the mystical powers and the forces that exist in this universe, where we're actually co-creating and not just pushing, excuse the French, but pushing shit up the hill ourselves. So this practice of building a more intimate relationship with myself has helped me to recognize what's going on internally. And I caught that. In that moment, I caught that. I stopped the fight. Instead of fighting myself, I decided to surrender and allow my body to sink heavily into the floor, and the pleasure of landing into myself, flooded my body head to toe. I kind of was all of a sudden allowing myself to be exactly how I was in that moment. I took a few breaths, I paused, I allowed myself to just slump and stop and sink and just breathe and really tune into nourishment. And nourishment is something that can come in so many different forms, and it's also something that I've become a lot more dedicated to in my life, where I'm realizing that the more I focus on nourishment, the more I'm actually supporting my nervous system. So I'm referring to nourishment in the sense of activating your 8 senses. So we're talking about taste, smell, touch, sound, sight, and then we have vestibular, which is movement, proprioceptive, which is orientation, and interoceptive, which is bodily signals and emotions. So activating these 8 senses is really important for the regulation of our nervous system. It also allows us time to calibrate our brain, to calibrate what's actually happening and process the information both internally and also externally, the information that's coming in from our environment. A lot of people have sensory processing disorders, everything from ADHD to autistic people, but also just complex and neural diversity in general has increased on our planet, which means that we need to understand our sensory profile, right? We need to understand and work with our senses. And this is how we get to also better experience our inner world as well as our external world. Our experiences of our bodies and our environment, they're kind of all intimately shaped by our sensory system. So how our mind and body integrate sensory information plays a really big role in everyday tasks, and it influences our ability to self-regulate, interact with others, and accomplish basically basic tasks in living or living in general. So we all have different ways of processing, different ways of understanding. We have hyposensitive, where people are under-responsive, and we have hypersensitive, where people are over-responsive and oversensitive to sensory input. And so being able to work with your 8 senses and activate them is really important, and it's a big part of building intimacy with self. And so really activating those senses, not fighting and getting caught up in what my mind was telling me, but rather just allowing myself to become completely present to what was arising from within me in that moment, where my body was, how I was feeling, contributed to me actually feeling recharged. There was no fight or resistance. There was just flow. moments later, I started to feel more recharged, almost like just surrendering and allowing myself to be where I was actually gave me energy. So when we fight the feeling of fatigue or the feeling of anything that we're going through, the pain, the emotions, the sadness, and we push through it without digesting the nervous system signals and breathing through it, we end up perpetuating that state. We end up feeling more tension. We end up feeling, more exhaustion. So by not doing that, I was now softened, and there was this supply of aliveness and energy within me. We're talking about supporting the nervous system in a way that feels loving, that feels nurturing, allowing it to digest life as it unfolds and as it happens, so that we're not constantly trapped in agitated energy and tension and symptoms and brain fog and fatigue and confusion and stress and worry and future and past, right? So making sense of our inner world and bodily sensations is really about, it's what this intimacy with self is about. It's part of living a vibrant life, that whatever I feel inside of me at each moment makes sense to me. It's a personal experience. It's a personal relationship to ourselves, because it's so unique. And we can actually manage and control that relationship with ourselves, our 8 senses and all of our bodily sensations, and base it on loving kindness, that no matter what you feel, you are able to actually bring in that nurturing, loving kindness. And this goes against everything we've been taught. We've been taught to push through. We've been taught to never surrender, never quit, never, I don't know what it is. We've got all these slogans, where we're either like we're looking at life through this black and white lens when it's not necessary. I mean, just look at nature. Nothing is black and white. Life isn't black and white. It's not meant to be black and white. And when we think that way and operate that way, we actually miss out on another way of living. We miss out on living with flow, which is so much more, I call it downstream living instead of upstream living. And it's not as difficult. It's not as much hard work, because life is already hard, right? Life is always going to challenge us. So why are we making it harder? We have a choice. And this loving attention towards ourselves generates feel-good neurochemicals, and it keeps our nervous system firing in balanced, healthy ways. It actually prevents chronic stress patterns from setting in, which is the exact thing that contributes towards chronic pain. So when our relationship with, our relationship with ourselves and our relationship to our body and our inner world hasn't been intentionally crafted, we can very easily slip into patterns of judgment and shame towards that inner experience, which in turn, again, leads to stress neurochemicals running the show. Our nervous system can get stuck in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, and it's exhausting. There isn't much loving kindness in that process to rejuvenate the nervous system. So when we don't make time to connect with ourselves, and we don't have these small little moments and windows of tuning inwards, what we're doing is we're staying in this pattern of go, achievement and doing, and putting all of our focus and emphasis on what's happening outside of us or what's not happening in our lives. We get caught up in our thoughts and we're not really present. So we're always exhausted because we're living in fight and flight. So when we start working within medicinal amounts and moderating our exposure to the different parts of ourselves, our battery levels improve, our fatigue disappears, our vitality comes back. And so we want to look at, okay, what is my What are my emotional needs? What are my intellectual needs? Am I understimulated? Am I overstimulated? Am I overwhelmed? What are my existential and spiritual needs? Am I understimulated and overstimulated there? What are my physical needs? Am I actually getting my bodily needs met neurologically? Do I have sensory deprivation or sensory overwhelm? And I know that it's hard. Like, let's say you have responsibilities and you are in a job that is very demanding, or let's say you live on your own and you have chronic health conditions and it's things that you just cannot change. A lot of us, if not all of us, are in situations that can't be immediately changed, right? But we can start somewhere. It doesn't mean that you need to fix your life to do this. Not at all. It means that you start doing this despite what's going on in your life. That you start to look at what's actually going on for you internally, because we're pretty much all of us are neurocomplex. So we need to take time to center and ground and take a few breaths and tune inwards. What needs are not being met? What is it that my neurobiology is actually telling me in this moment? And what can I do to just meet that need, even if it's momentarily for a little bit? Even if it means that I bring my attention to it, just like I had to do on the floor, just surrendering and just completely letting myself be for that moment as I was, without adding stories and narratives and judgments to it. Because when we don't get our needs met, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, creatively, existentially, sensory needs, intellectual needs, when we don't get our needs met, we tend to fall into that danger zone of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And the neurobiology is telling us, hey, listen to me, I'm not getting my needs met. Our subconscious body is talking to us. We're actually, our body is talking to us. And this is something that we need to listen to, because it's always talking to us through our symptoms, our sensations, our dreams, our visions, through our intuition, through symbolism, through mysticism. And so we want to pay attention to that. I'm getting a little bit passionate here because it's something I've come to recognize in my own life as well. That it's not about becoming a perfect individual or having a perfect life where everything is within your control. It's about returning to your center, finding your center, coming back home to yourself several times a day, learning to honor what's actually showing up for you, what you're feeling. What am I feeling? What's going on? What am I dismissing? That's what I'm talking about here. Not just dismissing, gaslighting, calming down, settling down. No, actually tuning in, feeling it, being with it. Because our outer world is really blind to our inner world. We become blind to our inner world because we're not being taught the mirroring from a young age. And that's really key. It's really important. And it's something that I'm noticing is incredibly lacking in our world today. And it's going to become more of a necessary practice as we continue living this life, in this fast-paced life, in this fast-paced world as we're living it. We basically experience as much joy as we're capable of experiencing pain and holding space for our pain. And I think it's important to mention that because it's like a neurological bandwidth. And that's why when people are constantly subscribed antidepressants and medication for anxiety and so on, even though that can sometimes be necessary when you're absolutely not, you're not coping, it also tends to squash this experience of being human. And it actually takes away from our ability to build that resilience, that emotional and mental resilience, so that we can have this emotional bandwidth and window of tolerance to really surf the highs and the lows of life, so that we can end up with this healthy, approach to life that's fluid. So how do we build a healthier and more intimate relationship with ourselves. I've talked about this in previous episodes. It's something that I'm always coming back to because I think we need reminders, and also because, it's a journey. It's not something that we have been culturally, and environmentally necessarily taught how to do. And initially, in the beginning, I want to say that it's really normal for there to be resistance. That's why we tend to avoid and distract and do anything but actually go inwards. Most of us have a lot of things that get shoved in the bag and pushed aside. But once we come into this practice of anchoring and expressing the art that we actually are, and allowing for whatever is happening to move through us and shape us and form us, as opposed to holding it in and suppressing it, this sense of freedom and lightness returns to the body. There's a feeling of resourcefulness, capacity, joy, play, fun in experiencing the fullness of that humanity. But also, oh my God, this is amazing. I need to lap it up because it will end and everything is temporary. And it's really amazing and beautiful and ecstatic. I need to stop and smell the roses. I need to stop and absorb this life because it's going to pass. And the same thing happens for those big dips, those real lows. It's like, okay, I'm releasing something here. I'm going through a dip. There's something inside of me that's not in alignment. There's something inside of me that's clashing. There's resistance within me. And so we become familiar with everything that we are. We build a relationship with this intercomplexity of who and what we are, which I don't know about you, but I think there's incredible beauty in that. We're just embracing our natural fullness, our natural intensity. And no, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a slow process. It's a bit like what I spoke about in the previous podcast episode. You learn how to embrace your edges, right? We get to the edges of what we're comfortable with, and then we pause and we breathe there, and we're noticing, okay, I'm expanding and this hurts. When I feel more love, more connection, but I feel more grief and more fragments and more loss. And this is why, I often hear people tell me in my clinic, I feel like I'm going backwards the more I do this work and the more I get to know myself. And it's like, no, you're not going backwards. You're just more, experiencing more aliveness. You feel both. You feel everything because you're expanding into wholeness, and you can't cherry pick just the nice, lovely, cushy moments, right? We actually feel more of everything. And that's what it's about, that you value this experience of being human. We're not judging anger or hesitation or grief or resentment. It's not that those things are worse than happiness and contentment and joy and connection. They're all equally important, and they're all neural patterns firing. But when we shut down to any of those things, we're shutting all of them down. We limit ourselves. If you shut down, to your pain, you're going to shut down to your joy. And what we want to do is we want to very gently and graciously release ourselves from that cage and learn to be who we are in each given moment. So as an example, whenever I have been dating or, newly dating, getting to know someone or liked someone, not quite knowing where I could position myself in the sense that whether that person was interested or not interested, what I meant to that person, I would get very wound up, very anxious, and there would be this tension, very visible physical tension in my body that would put me in this trauma state, the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn state, where I just wouldn't quite know how to center myself and not necessarily speak up, not necessarily express my truth, usually focus more on what the other person wanted and needed and expected from me, and not quite advocating for myself. And this would really throw me off. So one of the things that is important here when I'm talking about, this connection with self is self-advocacy, advocating for yourself, letting the other person know what you need, right? Honoring yourself is a way to cultivate safety for yourself. And if other people can't give you answers, they can't necessarily, reassure you in terms of their intentions. If they judge you, then they're not the right people for you. That's not the right job. That's not the right person. That's not the right friend or community, and so on. So this practice of coming home to ourselves, to building a deeper connection with ourselves, and to listening when our body is literally screaming and saying, I need to speak up. These are really important messages and practices that we have to cultivate. Even though it may not be socially expected or accepted, I can't stress this enough. Our neurobiology is something that we need to listen to. When it's screaming at you, it's basically saying, hey, I don't feel safe right now. And it's up to me to figure out, how I can cultivate that safety quietly in myself, whether it's with a bit of tapping, with a bit of self-talk, a bit of rocking, a bit of self-love, whether it's to speak my truth. Is there something I need from this particular situation, this person, this environment, that will help me gain that connection and that tribal feeling, that sense of belonging, so my nervous system can actually go, that's a relief, right? So it takes guts, it takes courage to actually do this work and to walk this path. In the beginning, it might not be easy, and we're just acknowledging that it's something that you're working on, that you're working towards. It might be something that we might be dipping our toes in and out of, but building up toning of our nervous system and building up of our own resilience and window of tolerance and centeredness is really the only way that we can keep healing and becoming our own healers, that we can actually feel safe. I mean, the amount of people I've worked with, and including in my own life, where you just rush to the doctor and rush to this professional and that professional trying to get the answers, and instead end up feeling more and more victimized. Not suggesting that if there isn't something serious going on with your health, you shouldn't see a medical professional by any means. I'm referring to the fact that more often than not, we're not taking full responsibility for our own self-healing and what it is that we have to do on a daily basis to become more conscious of our neurocomplexity, to listen to our neurobiology, to understand basically how our inner world is educating us. It's the GPS system, right? It's the compass. Our inner world is literally telling us how to stand up, how to speak up, how to function within the outer world. So we are learning inner world, outer world fluency, and that the outer world doesn't just tell me how to live my life and I'm a victim. I have to do everything I'm told. No, we're learning sovereignty. We're learning authenticity. We're learning integrity. We're learning these rich skills of self-advocacy. So to wrap up, I want to give you guys a couple of practical things that you can do, some practices that you can cultivate and, weave into your daily life. One of those things, and I try to do this myself, is when you're sitting at a stoplight and you're driving, just take a deep breath. Just a few times a day, checking in with your breathing, checking in with your breath, connecting with your body. Really making sure that you're allowing your whole body to become completely relaxed. And I find that placing your hands on your chest or on your belly can be really helpful in this process to make that connection with your body. I've talked about this in previous episodes. Another thing is when you're in the shower or when you're washing your hair, washing your body, really massaging your scalp vigorously, rubbing your ears, relaxing, taking several deep breaths, and just bringing your attention to the sensations in your body, to the sensations of that experience. Whenever you're standing in line or you're waiting around for something, instead of going on your phone and scrolling on your phone, just practice going up on your toes and slowly coming back down, for a few breaths, really bringing your attention to the rising and the falling of your breath, as well as your body and your legs and your toes. You can even do that with opening and closing the palm of your hands. Whenever you're watching television, you can alternate rubbing your hands, feet, and ears, breathing deeply, relaxing. These are all easy ways to impact your whole body without changing anything around, just becoming more body aware. You could be vacuuming the house and just really focusing on relaxing your shoulders, breathing deeply, coordinating, your movements with your breathing. If you're working in an office, every 20 minutes or 30 minutes, taking 3 deep breaths and adjusting your posture, noticing that you automatically relax on the exhalation and replacing stressful thoughts with encouraging thoughts, encouraging inner dialogue. Whenever you go for a walk or if you're exercising, really focusing on the inhale and the exhale, just tuning into that breath. These are really small suggestions, but they do wonders if you actually stay consistent. As little as 10 to 15 minutes of daily practice can have immense and immediate benefits. Even 10 seconds here and there will create such positive change in your nervous system and in supporting you in becoming more centered from within. Other things that are really good for building that intimate relationship with ourselves is exploring automatic writing. So writing whatever you're feeling is a great way to tap into your inner self and deepen that connection with yourself. Not really restricting yourself or editing yourself, but just letting that creativity flow. Writing whatever your heart desires, even going off on a rant or a tangent, which I think is really important because you'll start to recognize patterns. You start to gain insights into yourself, into your thoughts, into what's important for you, into what you need, right? Doing things that make you happy, doing things that support you in getting to know yourself. I often hear, I don't even know what makes me happy. That's okay. Explore. Try new things. Experiment. I talked about this a bit in the last episode, meeting our edges. You have to experiment with your likes and dislikes because that's what draws you closer to your true self. It's and even just allowing yourself to continue to expand something that, you might have tried a year ago or 6 months ago or even a month ago, you may feel differently towards if you give it another go. So not being too risk averse is important here, but rather looking at life through that lens of curiosity and playfulness. Because building a connection with ourselves is just like establishing any other relationship. It requires time, determination, exploration. It has to be a conscious choice. You have to decide that you want a deeper relationship with yourself and all of your parts. Personally, I treat every part of myself as if it's my child, as if I'm a parent to that part of myself. And my only job is to love that part, understand that part, to have loving discipline with that part, not to shame that part or try to get rid of that part. And yes, that requires patience, just like any relationship and definitely parenting does. To become a parent for ourselves is, it's a practice. It's a skill. And even though cultivating that healthier relationship with ourselves can be challenging and may take a lot of rethinking and effort, it's worth it. I feel that it's worth it. I would never promote it if I didn't think otherwise. Other things that I think are important is to really truly listen, to become a good listener. If something doesn't make you feel good about yourself, if something doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to, change it, to speak up, to try something else. And this is where you have to implement your own wisdom, because there's a fine line between giving up too soon and sometimes staying with something for far too long because you're trying to prove something to yourself or other people. If something doesn't feel good, a worthy person, someone who loves themselves, would not put up with things that hurt them. Someone who loves themselves would send back an order that they've made in a restaurant that isn't the right order, as opposed to just going along with things because they want to be easy, they want to be pleasing, they don't want people to think they're hard work. And yes, this goes against the way our culture trains us to be. But that's what self-leadership is about. Becoming a leader of yourself, becoming a leader of your life, not living for other people. I love the teachings of Gabor Mate, who is one of my teachers, and he often talks about how people who are pleasers and are always trying to please the world or uphold a specific image of themselves that isn't authentic and in fact is draining them, are the ones who tend to get sick, who tend to get unhappy, dissatisfied, and just carry a lot of resentment, a lot of grief towards life and towards other people. And to clarify, someone who is constantly angry, demanding, disrespectful, pushes people's boundaries to get their own way, is not necessarily authentically themselves either, right? So this is a trauma program, a trauma pattern as well, when we go to the other extreme, to the other end of the scale. So it's really about seeing life as this adventurous ride where I'm here to grow, I'm here to learn things, I'm here to try things, I'm here to experience things. And as I'm getting to know myself better, I'm trying different things out, which allows me to learn new skills, which stimulate creativity from within me, which expand my sense of accomplishment. And it allows me to stay open, to experience, life more fully, to really embrace this experience of being fully human, both with everything that happens inside of me and around me. All right, everybody, that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're interested in working with me, please visit mentalawakening.com.au. If you loved this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, as it will help more people to access the information shared here. Until next time, take care, everybody. Bye for now.